Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because 33 years ago, on this day, a horrific act of violence changed our country forever. On December 6, 1989, 14 women were murdered at École Polytechnique de Montréal when a gunman walked in, separated the women from the men, and opened fire.
They were murdered because they were women, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of this place, as a member of the Cabinet, as a mother, as a sister, as a daughter, I stand here to say that the Government of Canada will not tolerate gender-based violence anywhere, in any way in this country.
Today, on the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, we remember them.
Geneviève Bergeron, d'Hélène Coguin, de Nathalie Croteau, de Barbara Daignon, d'Annie Merveille-Edouard, de Maude Havenique, de Maryse Laganière, de Maryse Leclerc, d'Anne-Marie Lemay, de Sonia Pelletier, de Michel Richard, d'Annie Saint-Arnaud, d'Annie Turcotte, et de Barbara Klushnik-Vidievich. We also, Mr. Speaker, honor everyone who has been killed as a result of gender-based violence. Last year, 173 women and girls in Canada lost their lives in this way. This amounts to one woman or girl every 2 days. Every 2 days. Mr. Speaker, we stand in solidarity today and every day with victims and survivors of gender-based violence and their families. We bring attention to those most at risk, women and girls, Indigenous women and girls, members of 2S LGBTQI+ communities, women and gender-diverse people with disabilities, and women living in northern, rural, and remote communities. We honor and remember the women taken from us: Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, Rebecca Contois, and Mashkori Bizenweek. We will not forget them.
Gender-based violence has long-term impacts on individuals, families, and communities. It can happen at work, within families, and between acquaintances.
It is a form of abuse that costs lives, Mr. Speaker, and it must not be tolerated in Canada. These acts are part of a continuum of hate that needs to be disrupted. And each one of us has the power to help break that cycle. As my honourable colleagues know, we are currently commemorating the annual 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and our theme is "It's Not Just," a double meaning that reminds us both the injustice of gender-based violence and how society perpetuates it by excusing less violent and less obvious forms. I want to take a minute to talk about the lives impacted by these heinous acts. In 2021, 90 homicide victims were killed by an intimate partner. 3/4, that's 76% of these victims were women and girls. The number of victims of intimate partner homicide in 2021 was higher than in 2020, 84 victims, and 2019, 77 victims. This means mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts, cousins, friends, women and girls from all walks of life were killed at the hand of their intimate partners. Think of the children left behind when a mother is killed by her partner. Think of the mother left to carry on when her child is killed by their partner. Think of the communities left with a hole that cannot be filled when they lose an integral member. At a time when the gun lobby is using the memory of this horrendous anniversary to promote its own agenda, we must stand firm, defend the memories and legacies of those gone too soon. There is still much to be done, and we must all be part of the solution. In the past 7 years, we have shown leadership in the efforts to end gender-based violence. I would like now to speak a little bit about the progress that we have made so far. Madam Speaker, since 2015, the Government of Canada has taken a wide-ranging approach to combat gender-based violence, included but not limited to introducing the first-ever federal strategy to address gender-based violence, dedicating 25% of the national housing strategy to support women, banning assault-style weapons and putting a freeze on the sale and transfer of handguns within Canada, listing coercive control as a form of family violence in the Divorce Act, dedicating up to $30 million over 5 years for crisis hotlines, and working with provinces and territories, Madam Speaker, to deliver a national action plan to end gender-based violence and support survivors. On November 9th, the Federal, Provincial, and Territorial Forum of Ministers responsible for the status of women endorsed the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence. Over the next 10 years, the National Action Plan will enable federal, provincial, and territorial governments to continue working with victims and survivors, Indigenous partners, direct service providers, experts, advocates, municipalities, the private sector, and researchers to prevent and address gender-based violence in Canada. This work is historic. We look forward to moving ahead with our provincial and territorial colleagues to put the plan into action. We continue this important work in the memory of every person killed as a result of gender-based violence. We must not relent or feel defeated by the enormity of this issue. We must keep moving forward in our efforts to make Canada safer for everyone. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, je souhaiterais
I would close by addressing anyone hearing this message who is currently experiencing gender-based violence. Please, speak to someone you trust. Ask for help. You are not alone. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to honour and remember the victims of the tragic massacre at École Polytechnique 33 years ago. As the first female engineer here in the House of Commons, I will tell you, these women were my sisters. Le 6 décembre...
December 6th, 1989, an armed man entered into an engineering class at École Polytechnique where he ordered the men to leave, saying to the 9 other women that he was fighting feminism, and he opened fire, killing 6. Then, moving through the school, he targeted mainly women over a 20-minute shooting before turning his weapon on himself. 14 women were killed.
them now to respect them for the strong women they were. Geneviève Bergeron, 21 ans.
21 years old, mechanical engineering student. Helen Colgan, mechanical engineering student, 23 years old. Nathalie Croteau, 23 years old, student in mechanical engineering. Barbara Daigneault, 22 years old, student in mechanical engineering. Anne-Marie Edward, 21 years old, chemical engineering student. Maude Havernick, 29 years old, student in materials engineering. Barbara Klunik-Wiedewich, 31 years old, studying in nursing at the University of Montreal. Maryse Lagagnère, 25 years old, employee of École Polytechnique, Maryse Leclerc, materials engineering student, Anne-Marie Lemay, mechanical engineering student, Sonia Pelletier, mechanical engineering student, Michel Richard, materials engineering student, Annie St. Arnaud, 23 years old, mechanical engineering student, Annie Turcotte, materials engineering student, only 20 years old.
Je suis une femme.
I am a woman. I am an engineer. I have had many experiences where I have seen the unjustified fury of men in my field.
Kind of misplaced anger from men that seeks to remove us from the workforce. We must do more to prevent such acts of violence in our country, especially those that specifically target women. We've banned the gun that was used in these tragic murders, but we've not eradicated the hatred of men against women. Violent crime is up 32% in the country. Handguns were banned months ago, but we continue to hear of shootings every day in the country because the bottom line is criminals don't obey the law, and you can't legislate morality. We need to try to address the gender-based violent attitudes that lead to the kind of awful deaths that happened at École Polytechnique. In 2016, I was part of a study at Status of Women to eliminate violence against women and girls. I'm disheartened to see that the violent death of women continues to rise. We must address the root cause of misogynistic attitudes towards women. C'est le travail que nous devons.
This is work that we must do to give meaning to incidents like this one, which happened 33 years ago today. It is by doing this that we can honor their memory. These young women had brilliant lives ahead of them. They were very smart. Maybe some of them would have been elected to this House.
And may we work together to ensure this never happens again. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Madam Speaker, on December 6, 1989, 33 years ago, a man entered the École Polytechnique in Montreal and killed 14 women for no other reason than the fact that they were women. We do not forget. Geneviève Bergeron, Hélène Colgan, Nathalie Croteau, Barbara Daigneault, Anne-Marie Edward, Maude Havernick, Barbara Kluznik-Vidovich, Maryse Lagagnère, Maryse Leclerc, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelletier, Michel Richard, Annie St. Arnaud, Annie Turcotte. All those of us who are old enough to remember it. We remember where we were, with whom, and we remember what we were doing. And we hold in our hearts those feelings of panic, of horror, of incomprehension, of disbelief, of sadness, and of shame. Those are the feelings that December 6th made us feel. We hold close in our hearts the memory of these women who were torn away from life without reason. The tragedy of Polytechnique imposes on us a duty of memory. We must remember the errors of the past, the tragedies of the past, so that we can ensure that they are not repeated, so that we don't have to relive them. But the duty to remember does not come alone. It comes with words, because it is necessary to name things for what they are. Misogyny, feminicide, mass murder, armed violence. These are ugly words. These are dark words. These are dirty words. And they're words that unfortunately we will continue to hear. They're words that continue to strike us, humiliate us, destroy us. And thinking of the women of École Polytechnique, I want us to have new words. We need new words. Love, hope, solidarity, determination. The duty of remembrance requires us to name things, and it requires that we act. It requires that we hope. Equality is progressing. Misogyny is more and more exposed in the light of day, and we can win. We will never totally win the battle against violence. There will always be problems. But I'm convinced, and I want to be convinced, that we are moving in the right direction. We have no choice. We owe it to all those who have paid with their lives for being a woman. We owe it to the girls of École Polytechnique. We owe it to our sisters who were recently murdered in Manitoba, and to all those missing or murdered across Canada. We owe it to the hundreds, the thousands of women killed because they were women and who have been killed over the last 33 years. We must move in the right direction. The duty to remember also comes with a duty to act. Tightening of gun control, banning assault weapons, Quebec's gun registry, these are all steps in the right direction. I wouldn't say that Bill C-21 is perfect or that the government has done everything properly, but I will say that limiting access to assault weapons is necessary, and it is a step in the right direction. And finally, the collective awareness that we've seen of sexual assault and crimes of a sexual nature is a step in the right direction. And that too gives us hope. The women of École Polytechnique would be mothers, perhaps grandmothers today. For the last 33 years, some of the survivors have held candlelight vigils alone, and then with their daughters or sons, and tonight, perhaps, with their grandchildren. And these generations that follow one another and who share the memory of those we have lost show that we do not forget. We don't forget the tragedy, the loss, nor the responsibility to act, nor hope.
Geneviève, Hélène, Nathalie, Barbara Daigneault, Anne-Marie Edouard, Maude, Barbara Klusnik-Vidajevic, Maryse Laganière, Maryse Leclerc, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia, Michel, Annie Saint-Arnaud et Annie Turcotte.
We know our debt, and we will not forget. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise on this solemn occasion to commemorate a horrific tragedy, the memory of École Polytechnique massacre, which took place on this day 33 years ago. It's still etched in the minds of millions of people who will never forget this act of femicide. Let me begin by paying tribute to the women who were murdered on December 6, 1989. Geneviève Bergeron, Hélène Coljean, Nathalie Croteau, Barbara Daigneault, Anne-Marie Edouard, Maude Havernick, Maryse Laganière, Maryse Leclerc, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelche, Michel Richard, Annie Saint-Arnaud, Annie Turcotte and Barba Kluchenik-Vadewicz. These women had big dreams. They dreamt of becoming engineers, a male-dominated profession, especially at that time. Their dreams and their lives were stolen by a man poisoned by misogynistic hate, a man who, as he opened fire, shouted, "You are all feminists." They were killed because they were women. They were killed because they dared to pursue a career in an overwhelmingly male field. They were killed by an act of violent misogyny. 30 years later, violence born of misogyny, toxic masculinity, and racism is still killing women and gender diverse people across the country. Every 6 days, a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner. In 2021, 173 women and girls were killed by violence, up from 160 the year before. And Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people continue to go missing or be murdered at alarming rates. Madam Speaker, 5 days before the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, we received news about another unspeakable femicide. Three more Indigenous women, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and a third woman that the elders have asked us to call Buffalo Woman until her family can be found, were murdered by an alleged serial killer in Winnipeg who was also charged with the murder of Rebecca Contois in May 2022. It is part of what the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and the Prime Minister have described as an ongoing genocide. As with the perpetrator of the Polytechnique massacre, what we know about this alleged serial killer is that he too was poisoned by hatred. A review of his social media activity revealed posts that promoted violence, misogyny, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy. And once again, Madam Speaker, we were witnessing the fatal consequences of a growing far-right extremism. While our country reels from this enormous loss, the Winnipeg Police Service declared that they would not undertake a search for the remains of the three precious sisters believed to be in the located in the Brady landfill. Now, I understand, Madam Speaker, that this might not be feasible, but at the very least, they need to stop dumping trash in the landfill so that our loved ones can rest in peace and undisturbed. What message does that callous decision send to Indigenous women, to survivors, to the families of victims? It says that we are less than, that our lives have been deemed not valuable, that our ongoing genocide has been normalized. It has been so normalized that it's not even considered an emergency in this House. We should not have to plead for our safety to be taken seriously or for our families to be given the closure they deserve. We need to be provided with the resources because we deserve closure, Madam Speaker. The federal government must heed the calls of survivors, advocates, and community leaders by providing immediate funding to stop this genocide and the resources to search for the remains of our precious sisters wherever they may be. This is a human rights crisis. When faced with a crisis, you don't ignore it, you must act. While today is a day of remembrance, it's also a day of action. I urge the federal government and all governments in Canada to heed this call to action by taking urgent steps to stop this violence. We will never forget the 14 women whose lives were taken 33 years ago. We will never forget the 4 Indigenous women and all the Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people whose lives were taken earlier this year and for the past decades. In their cherished memory, we will renew our efforts to end gender-based violence once and for all. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands. I believe the member from Saanich Gulf Islands is seeking the unanimous consent of the House to reply. Does the Honourable Member have the unanimous consent of the House to speak? The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I'd like to thank all my colleagues for that, for the permission, and also for their support. We're together here today, and I'd like to thank my colleague, the member for the responsible for this file, and my colleague from Sarnia Lambton, who has shared a message that touched me deeply. My colleague, the member for Shefford, and also the member for Winnipeg Centre.
In this place, do work in an environment that is traditionally male-dominated. All of our society is dominated by the notion of patriarchy. Men are usually in charge. It's very hard on this day, le journée de souvenir, de penser.
A day of remembrance to think of the events of December 6th, 1989. A day that I remember as if it were yesterday.
Who were alive and conscious and politically aware. The deliberate killing of 16 women, so young, their only crime being in a classroom to study to become an engineer. Their only crime to be a woman. Margaret Atwood has said, men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. We are in a time, as many of my colleagues have mentioned, where violence against women is on the rise. Violence against women, women who are intimate partners, are at risk. There's no question but that the words of the member for Winnipeg Centre should ring out clearly across Canada. Women are particularly at risk when they have 2 crimes. They are women and they are Indigenous. The recent charges brought against a serial killer in Winnipeg for those deaths must wake us up to, again, misogyny, racism, and the crimes of a toxic culture in which patriarchy is the accepted default position. We have to ask ourselves, what more can we do? There's no question but that every member, every party in this place says it's time. We must end violence against women. And here we are 33 years on. And violence against women continues. What we can say is that we need our allies. And on this day when so many women turn to each other in sisterhood and solidarity, we embrace especially our male colleagues. Men who will stand up and say, I'm a feminist. Men who will stand up and say, patriarchy belongs in the dark pages of history. We must speak out against femicide. We must stand with those women still in Afghanistan and help them to survive. We must stand with all Indigenous women and girls across this country and with the families of those who still don't know where their fallen mommies and aunties and sisters and daughters are. We must say that it's time to end violence. Violence against women, violence against each other, violence that we carry in our hearts. The killing of the 16 women on December 6, 1989, must never be forgotten. It is of them we think this day, but we also say we know that ending violence is a job for us all. It does not just fall on women. It does not just fall on governments. It requires that all of us, heart to heart, neighbor to neighbor, Pay attention. Protect anyone you see as vulnerable. Step up in the moment when you hear hatred spoken, because words of hate can turn into acts of hate. We must, especially in this place, because we're here and we know each other, we must try harder to take the violence out of our language, to take polarization out of our politics, so that we can say to Canadians, we're a country that takes care of each other, we love each other, and in the memory of 16 women killed on this day 33 years ago, we banish hate from our hearts. Thank you.
À la suite de discussions entre
Further to discussions among the representatives of all the parties in the House, there is unanimous consent to observe a moment of silence.
Observe a minute of silence in memory of the victims of the tragic event that happened 33 years ago at École Polytechnique de Montréal.